The rain was the kind that does not announce itself. No thunder, no warning. Just the sudden weight of it against the window of a black car sitting still on a street that had no reason to be quiet at this hour. She was still in the gown. Her phone was lit up in her lap. One message, 3 words and a punctuation mark that somehow carried the weight of everything she had spent the last 10 years trying to prevent. "I'm sorry, Zara." She did not cry. That is the thing you need to understand about her before any of this makes sense. Zara did not cry in the back of cars or in the middle of disasters. She saved that for later, for rooms where no one could build a story around her tears. What she did instead was breathe, slowly. The way you breathe when you are deciding whether the version of yourself that walks out of this car is the same one that got in. It was not. But we are getting ahead of ourselves, because to understand that message and what it cost the person who sent it and what it cost the woman reading it, you need to go back. Back to a night that smelled like champagne and expensive flowers, and something underneath both of those things that she could not name until it was far too late. Back to the gala. Zara had been building toward that night for 8 months. Not the gala specifically. The version of herself that could walk into a room like that and belong there without apology. She had been constructing that woman since her father died 4 years earlier and left behind 2 things: a daughter who refused to break and a son who did not yet know how fragile he was. She was an event curator. That is the clean way to say it. The fuller version is that she was the kind of woman that old money called when it wanted to look like it had taste instead of just resources. She designed experiences. She built the architecture of evenings that people described for years afterward. And she was extraordinary at it, not because she was taught how, but because she had spent her entire life watching rooms and learning exactly what each one was missing. The Sorak Grand Gala was her largest commission yet. Madame Wren had personally selected her after 2 other firms failed to deliver a concept that felt worthy of the occasion. Zara had delivered something that made Madame Wren go quiet for a long moment before simply saying, "Yes, this." The theme was duality. 2 worlds in one room, gold against shadow, softness against structure. It was, without Zara consciously deciding this, the story of her own life, translated into floral arrangements and lighting design, and the specific temperature of a room that makes people feel simultaneously safe and electric. She had earned her seat at that table. She had bled for it quietly and without audience for years. And when she walked through those doors on the night of the gala, in a deep emerald gown that she had saved 3 months to afford, she felt, for perhaps the first time in her adult life, like the room had been waiting for her. That feeling lasted exactly 40 minutes. The room was everything she had designed it to be, and somehow more. 12-meter ceilings draped in cascading ivory fabric that caught the candlelight and held it like something alive. Tables set in concentric rings around a central space that was deliberately, beautifully empty. An absence that made the room feel like it was holding its breath. 200 guests in formal wear moving through the space like they were part of the installation, which, in a way, they were. Madame Wren moved through the room with the specific authority of a woman who has never once in her adult life had to navigate around another person. People simply adjusted. She found Zara near the eastern wall and held both her hands in the way that people with real power sometimes do. Not as a greeting, but as a declaration. "You have given me something extraordinary," she said. And Madame Wren was not a woman who said things she did not mean. Zara smiled. The real one. The one that very few people got to see. And then she turned to find a glass of water, because the room was warm, and she needed a moment that was just hers. A single quiet breath inside the evening she had constructed. She turned, and she saw him. He was standing at the far edge of the room near the tall windows. Not near them the way people stand near beautiful things to admire them. Near them the way a person stands when they need the exit to be visible and the room to be in front of them. He was watching the space with the specific attention of someone who is not here for the occasion, someone who is here for something else entirely. He was dressed in black. Not the festive black of the other men in the room, something darker, more architectural. Like the suit was an argument he had already won. Zara registered him the way you register a change in pressure. Not a conscious thought, something older than thought. She looked away. She found her water. She had 3 separate conversations with guests who wanted to praise the evening, and she was present for all of them and thinking about none of them. She looked back. He was still there. And this time, he was looking directly at her. Not the way men look at women at events like this. Not appreciation. Not interest in the usual sense. He was looking at her the way you look at something you already know. Recognition without introduction. And that, more than anything else about the night, was what should have told her to leave. His name was Jay. She did not know that yet. If Zara noticed Jay, Celestine noticed Zara noticing Jay. And that, in the architecture of what was about to happen, was perhaps the most dangerous event of the entire evening. Celestine had been in the room for an hour before Zara even arrived. She had positioned herself precisely, close enough to Jay to signal ownership, far enough to seem effortless about it. She was wearing ivory. She always wore ivory at events like this because it made her impossible to miss and impossible to dismiss. And she had learned a long time ago that those 2 things together were their own kind of power. She was beautiful in the way that certain things are beautiful, completely, deliberately, and with an edge underneath it that made you careful. She watched Zara move through the room. She watched the way Madame Wren held her hands. She watched the moment at the window. And something behind her eyes went very quiet and very busy at the same time. Celestine had spent 2 years making herself indispensable to Jay's world, not because she loved him, though she had told herself that story enough times that the line had blurred, because Jay's world was the only world she had ever encountered that matched the scale of what she believed she deserved. And she had not survived 2 years in that world by being careless about threats. Zara, who did not yet know that she was in any world other than her own, was already a threat. Celestine decided this the way she decided most things, quickly, quietly, and without the inconvenience of doubt. What does it feel like, I wonder, to be in a room full of people who are all pretending? To be the only honest thing in a space built on performance? Zara did not know she was the only honest thing in that room that night, but the room knew. Rooms always know. Drop a comment and tell me, where are you watching this from tonight? Because I have a feeling the people finding this story are exactly the kind of people who understand what it costs to be the realest person in every room you walk into. She did not speak to Jay that night. Not properly. There was a moment near the end of the evening, in the corridor outside the main hall where the sound of the room softened to a murmur, where they were briefly in the same narrow space, and he stopped. Not because the corridor required it, because he chose to. He looked at her for a moment that lasted slightly longer than social convention allowed. Then he said, very quietly, "You built something extraordinary in there." She said, "I know." And she walked past him. She told herself later that it was confidence. The honest answer is that she did not trust her voice to carry anything more complex than 2 words in that particular moment. There was something about the way he occupied space that made the air feel rearranged. She went home. She thought about him twice before she fell asleep and told herself both times to stop. 3 days later, Kofi called. She knew from the quality of his silence on the line before he said a single word. Kofi had a particular silence when something was wrong, a held breath that he stretched 2 seconds longer than it needed to be, as if he was still deciding whether to speak. She had been hearing that silence her whole life. She had been dreading this version of it for months without being able to articulate why. He owed money, a significant amount. He had borrowed it 6 months ago from a lending source that a friend of a friend had connected him to, told himself it was temporary, and then made a series of decisions that people make when they are hoping the problem will solve itself before anyone who loves them has to find out. The problem had not solved itself. The number he told her was not catastrophic in the abstract. In the context of what she actually had access to, it was a wall. And the people he owed it to were not the kind of people who accepted payment plans or expressions of good faith. She asked him who. He told her the name of the front company. She did not recognize it. She wrote it down. She told him she would handle it. He told her not to. She told him that was not a discussion they were having. She said she loved him. She ended the call. And then she sat at her kitchen table for a very long time, in a silence that had nothing comfortable in it. It took her 48 hours to find out who the front company actually belonged to. She had a contact, a woman named Zara, who had spent 15 years in financial compliance and knew where every thread in the city led if you pulled it long enough and carefully enough. Zara called her back in less than a day. Her voice had a specific texture that Zara had never heard in it before. Careful. Measured in a way that felt like warning. The company belonged to a network. The network, when you traced it far enough, led to an organization. And the organization, at its center, had a name. Jay. Zara sat with that information for a long time. The man at the window. The man in the corridor who said she had built something extraordinary. The man whose gaze had rearranged the air. He was the man her brother owed money to. She thought about running. She thought about lawyers. She thought about calling Madame Wren and using whatever social leverage the Gala had generated to negotiate through intermediaries. She thought about every option except the one she was going to choose. And then she chose it. She was going to walk in and handle it herself. Now here's what I need you to think about, because this is the moment where most people would have made a different choice. She knew who he was. She knew what that name meant, and she walked toward it. Not because she was reckless, because she was Zara. And Zara had learned a long time ago that the only debts that actually ruin you are the ones you let other people carry on your behalf. Tell me something. If someone you loved was in danger, and you had one shot to walk into the most dangerous room available to fix it, would you go? I genuinely want to know what you think. Drop your answer below because I think this story is about to divide the room. The meeting took 3 days to arrange. Sonu handled the logistics with the specific efficiency of someone who had done this before, which he had, though not in these circumstances. People did not typically request meetings with Jay. They received summons. The direction of request was itself unusual enough that Sonu flagged it. Jay did not look surprised when Sonu told him who was asking. That should have told Sonu something. It did, but he filed it under information rather than concern and moved on. The location was a private office above a legitimate architectural firm in the business district. Clean lines, expensive restraint. The kind of space that tells you money is not something being displayed here because it does not need to be. Zara arrived 7 minutes early. She wore black, structured shoulders, minimal jewelry. She had chosen the outfit with the specific intentionality of someone preparing for a negotiation rather than a confrontation, because she understood that how you dress tells the room what you think of it before you open your mouth. She wanted the room to know she was serious. She did not want it to know she was afraid. She was afraid. Jay was already inside when she was shown in, standing, not at the desk, but at the window again. She noticed that and filed it away. A man who needs exits visible is a man who has learned that rooms can become traps. That was the first thing she understood about him that had nothing to do with what he controlled. He turned when she entered, and for a moment, neither of them acknowledged the specific strangeness of this, that they had stood in a corridor 3 days ago and exchanged exactly 3 words between them, and now she was here to negotiate for her brother's life. She spoke first. She told him she was here about the debt under a specific account number that Dira had given her, registered to her brother. She told him she was prepared to discuss structured repayment options, or, if he preferred, a single settlement figure that she would need 30 days to arrange. She said all of this without sitting down, because she had not been invited to sit and she was not going to ask. Jay watched her through all of it, not impatiently, with the particular attention of someone who is listening to more than the words. When she finished, he said, "Sit down, Zara." She sat. He said, "Your brother's debt is not the reason you're here." She said, "I disagree." He almost smiled. Almost. The corner of his mouth moved in a way that in any other context would have been unremarkable. In this one, it felt significant. He said, "The debt can be managed. That is not the problem. The problem is that your brother did not find that lending source by accident. And the person who made sure he found it is someone whose interest in your family predates this debt by a considerable amount of time." Zara went still. Not the controlled stillness she performed in difficult rooms, the real stillness. The kind that happens when your body understands something before your mind catches up. She said, "What are you telling me?" He said, "I am telling you that Kofi was chosen. And I need you to understand what that means before you leave this room. There is a specific kind of silence that happens when everything you thought you understood about a situation turns out to be the wrong map entirely." Zara sat in that silence for 3 full seconds, which does not sound like long. In that room, in that moment, it was enormous. She said, "Chosen by who?" And Jay said a name. Beck. She did not know the name. But the way Jay said it, carefully, precisely, with the specific weight of someone placing something fragile on a surface, told her everything about what the name meant in the architecture of his world. It was not an enemy's name. It was something more complicated than that. She would learn later that Beck was his uncle. She would learn later what Beck had done to deserve the careful way Jay pronounced his name in that office. But in that moment, all she knew was that Kofi had not wandered into the situation. He had been placed into it, deliberately, by someone who wanted something. And the something they wanted was not money. The money was never about the money. It was about her. Beck had been watching Zara for longer than she knew. Not in the obvious way. In the patient way of someone who has identified a resource and is waiting for the precise moment of maximum leverage before reaching for it. He had found Kofi through careful observation. He had made the money available through 3 layers of front organizations. He had waited for Kofi to do exactly what Kofi did, because Beck understood, with the cold clarity of someone who has spent decades studying human weakness, that Kofi would. That was the cruelty of it. He had not manufactured Kofi's recklessness. He had simply waited for it. And when the debt was in place and Zara was in motion, which Beck had known she would be because he understood her nature better than she was comfortable with, he had a mechanism, a way to reach her, a way to ask her for something in exchange for her brother's safety. The something he wanted was information, specifically evidence. The kind of evidence that Jay had been quietly accumulating for 18 months. The kind that, if it surfaced in the right hands, would end Beck's position in the organization permanently. Beck had suspected for months that Jay was building a case against him. What he needed was to know how far along that case was and what specific materials Jay had gathered. And he had correctly identified that the fastest path to that information was not through anyone in the organization. It was through someone outside it who had something to lose. Someone like Zara. She left Jay's office with more information than she had arrived with, and no clearer sense of what to do with it. The walk back to her car felt longer than it was. The city moved around her with its usual indifference to private disasters, which she had always found both offensive and faintly comforting. Her phone rang before she reached the car. Unknown number. She answered because she was already in the kind of day where not answering felt like a luxury she could not afford. The voice on the other end was warm, measured, pleasantly, specifically warm, in a way that her body registered as wrong before her mind caught up. He said his name was Beck. He said he believed they had a mutual concern regarding her brother. He said he hoped they could find a way to help each other. She stood on the pavement in the gray afternoon light and understood, with complete clarity, that she was now inside something with walls on every side. Can I tell you something? The moment Zara stood on that pavement and heard that voice, she was angrier than she had ever been in her adult life. Not frightened, angry. Because she recognized the architecture of what had been done to her, the patience of it, the presumption that she could be maneuvered, that her love for her brother was a lever that someone else got to pull. If that makes your blood run hot right now, I need you to feel that, because what she does next comes entirely from that anger. And anger, when it belongs to the right person, is not destruction. It is direction. She did not call Beck back. She called Jay. He answered on the second ring. She said, "He already called me." Jay was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How long ago?" She said, 4 minutes. He said, "Where are you?" She told him. He said, "Do not go home tonight." She said, "I need you to tell me everything, all of it, from the beginning." He said, "I know. Come back." What followed in that office over the next 3 hours was the kind of conversation that dismantles the careful distance between two people who have been keeping it deliberately. Jay told her about Beck. Not everything. There were things he was not ready to say yet, and she understood this without being told. But enough. He told her about his father, about the 18 months of careful, quiet work, about what Beck was afraid of and why, about why Zara's name had appeared in a separate file months before Kofi ever borrowed a single coin from anyone. That was the part that stopped her. She said, "What file?" He was quiet for a moment, not reluctant, arranging something. He said, "Your mother's name was Sua." She went absolutely still. Her mother had been dead for 6 years. Her mother's name in this room, in this context, felt like a door opening in a wall she had not known was there. She said, "Yes." He said, "She knew my father, not casually. They worked together before either of us was born, in a context that Beck buried because it connected two families in a way that gave those families a specific kind of claim that he did not want to exist." Zara looked at him for a long time. She said, "What kind of claim?" He said, "The kind that proves what Beck did to my father was not about the organization. It was about erasing a record. And your mother was part of that record." She thought about her mother, a woman who had spent 20 years making herself smaller, a woman who kept a box of letters in the back of a wardrobe that Zara had never been allowed to open and had not opened after her death, out of a grief that felt, at the time, like respect. The box was in storage, in a unit across the city that Zara paid $40 a month to maintain because she could not bring herself to sort through the last physical evidence of her mother's interior life. She said, "I think I have something you need to see." They went together, Jay and Sonu in one car, Zara in her own, because she needed the 20 minutes of driving alone. The storage unit was in a building that smelled of dust and the particular silence of preserved things. She knew which box immediately. She had always known which box. She had simply never been ready. She was ready now. The letters were in Korean. Zara's Korean was functional, not fluent, but Jay's was native. He read them quietly, standing in the fluorescent light of a storage unit surrounded by the preserved fragments of a life. And she watched his face do something she had not seen it do before. The operational calm dissolved, layer by layer, until what was underneath it was something much younger and much less defended. He said, "She kept everything." His voice was different when he said it. She understood without being told that he was not talking about her mother alone. The letters were not just correspondence. They were documentation. Her mother, meticulous and quiet and underestimated by everyone who ever met her, had kept copies of financial records, meeting notes, and signed agreements from a period 25 years earlier when she had been working as an interpreter for a business negotiation that Beck had facilitated. A negotiation that Beck had subsequently falsified. A falsification that had directly enabled everything that came after, including what happened to Jay's father. She had kept it all, in a box, in the back of a wardrobe, and then in storage, waiting perhaps for a moment she had never arrived to use it. Her daughter was using it now. Zara did not hand the letters to Jay. She did not give them to anyone. What she did instead was something that no one in Beck's calculation had anticipated, because it required a quality that Beck had specifically discounted when he assessed her: patience. She made copies. She secured the originals. And then she arranged, through Madame Wren, whose social architecture turned out to be both wider and more strategically useful than decorative, a gathering. Small, private, the kind that did not appear on any formal calendar, but that the right people attended because Madame Wren's invitations were not declined. Beck was there. He did not know Zara would be. Jay was there. He did not know what Zara was going to do. She stood up in that room, a room of 12 people who collectively held more power than most institutions, and she spoke. Not loudly, not dramatically, in the same measured, precise voice she used when she told a room what it was missing. She laid out what the letters documented. She named the falsification. She named what it had enabled. She named Beck, clearly and without hedging, in front of every person whose opinion of him formed the architecture of his power. Beck's face did something during this that she would think about for a long time afterward. The warmth did not drop immediately. It was gradual, like watching a very well-constructed performance realize, piece by piece, that the audience already knows the ending. He started to speak. She placed a copy of one document on the table in front of him and said, "I have the originals." He stopped speaking. The room was very quiet. The kind of quiet that is not empty, but full of people recalibrating, reassessing, repositioning themselves relative to what they have just learned. Kofi was released the following morning. Jay handled the specifics personally, which was notable because Jay did not typically handle specifics personally. Sonu noticed this and said nothing. Beck did not fight. That was the thing about men who have operated through patience and architecture for decades. When the architecture collapses, they do not rage. They go quiet, and they begin again somewhere else. Jay knew this. He had people watching. The 18 months of evidence he had built was now moving through the appropriate channels, with the documentation from the letters accelerating what had previously been a slow and careful process. It was not finished. It would not be finished quickly, but the balance of the room had shifted in a way that could not be unshifted. Celestine left the city 3 weeks later, not because anyone asked her to, because she was, above all things, strategic. And the strategy that had organized the last 2 years of her life had just lost its foundation. She would find another room. She would find another position. She was very good at beginning again, which was, in its own way, a kind of strength. Zara did not think about Celestine much. She had too many other things to think about. Kofi came to see her the night after he was released. He sat across from her at the kitchen table, where she had sat alone with the weight of his phone call weeks earlier, and he looked at her for a long time without speaking. Then he said, "I'm going to fix this. I mean what I owe you, not the money, the other thing." She said, "I know you are." He said, "You didn't have to do any of that." She said, "Yes, I did." He rubbed the back of his neck the way he always did when he was about to say something true. He said, "You're exactly like her, you know, Mum. She never let anything beat her either." Zara looked at her brother across the table. She thought about a woman who wore ivory at Korean social events and Ghanaian ones and was fully accepted by neither. A woman who kept letters in a box and records in a wardrobe and said nothing for 25 years because the moment was not right. A woman who had, without knowing she was doing it, handed her daughter exactly what her daughter needed, exactly when she needed it. She said, "I know." She saw Jay one more time before the story settled into whatever it was becoming. Not in an office, not in a storage unit under fluorescent light. At a rooftop in the early evening when the city was doing the thing it sometimes does, turning gold at the edges like it knows someone is watching and wants to be worth the attention. He said, "What you did in that room, I did not know you were going to do that." She said, "I know, that was the point." He said, "You could have given the letters to me. You could have let me handle it." She said, "Yes, but then it would have been your story, and this was mine." He looked at her in the particular way he had, processing, assessing, the operational calm doing its work. And then something underneath it shifted. Not the almost smile from the corridor, something slower and more deliberate. He said, "Your mother kept those letters for 25 years. She said, "She was patient." He said, "And you? Are you patient?" She looked at the city going gold at its edges. She thought about 8 months of building toward a single night, about a decade of holding a world together with both hands, about a storage unit and a box she was not ready to open until she was. She said, "I have learned to be. There is something I want to leave you with before we close this story out." Zara walked into the Sodak Grand Gala as a professional. She walked out of those weeks as something harder to name. She had not been rescued. She had not been transformed by danger into something she was not. She had simply been pushed far enough that everything she had always been finally had somewhere to go. Her mother built a record for 25 years and said nothing. Zara used it in 20 minutes and changed the room. That is not luck. That is inheritance. The kind that does not show up in wills. The kind that lives in boxes, in storage units, in cities that do not know what they are holding. The kind that waits patiently for the daughter who is finally ready. Some debts are not about money. Some debts are about what you owe the version of yourself that survived things that should have stopped you. Zara paid hers. Kofi started paying his. Jay, for the first time in a decade, had a board in front of him where the pieces were finally where he had put them rather than where Beck had arranged them. And somewhere across the city, in an office that was already being quietly reorganized, a patient man was sitting in the particular silence of someone who has lost a battle but not yet conceded the war. That is another story, for another room. This one ends here, in gold light, on a rooftop, with a woman who learned patience from a mother who kept letters, and a man who learned, perhaps for the first time, that the most dangerous person in any room is not the one with the most power. It is the one with the most truth.